everybody, I'm Sarah Gallegos and I'm back with another exciting episode of Serger Saturday for you. I've been having a lot of fun the last few weeks sharing with you some of my favorite ways to incorporate my serger into quilting. And today I'm going to share a quilt-as-you-go technique. Now this is a technique I'm going to show you to you in a very basic way, but you could morph this into a lot of different things. So I've got a couple of examples to show you first, and then I'll talk to you about how we actually do it. So a couple of quilts that I've used, or that I've made using just my serger. This cute little quilt is completely constructed on the serger. The only part that I did on my sewing machine was stitching down the decorative stitch on my binding. But it all works in rows, and if you can break a quilt pattern into rows, you can easily make it a serger quilt. So on the front of the quilt, I used rows that have cute little ruffle strips on them, and then on the back, I just used rows of fabric. Now you can make those rows match so that the whole back looks solid like a traditional quilt would, or you can make it kind of stripey like I did. I like to do that, I think it's fun. Now here's another variation of the same thing where I actually pieced my rows. So you can see that I've got several fabrics sewn together, and that creates the row, like this is a row right here. And then I pieced it in rows with the backing pieces as well. So, and again, on my back, I did kind of a mixy-matchy thing. Now for the borders, I use the exact same method that I'm going to show you, but instead of just adding straight rows on to make the body of the quilt, think about how you can cut border strips as well and add them to all four sides of your quilt using the same technique. So lots of fun to use your serger for quick and easy sewing. Now a couple things to talk about when you're using this method. You do end up with a little bit thicker seam where all those seams come together. So is this your prize winning quilt that you're going to put in the quilt show? Maybe not. But it's a super duper durable quilt that anybody would love to have. It's really cozy and nice to work with. Now, the width of the rows that you create is going to really depend on your batting. Now, you may not have ever paid attention to the plastic package that your batting comes in, but there are instructions. So I'm actually working with warm and white batting right now. And when I flip over to the back, I can see that it tells me that this is for quilting or tying up to 10 inches apart. That means that you need to have some quilting up to every 10 inches, right? So your strips should not be wider than 10 inches. You'd want to make them a little bit narrower than that, and you'll still have a really sturdy quilt. So once you've determined what that size is going to be, you're going to cut strips of batting. So here's my batting. I'm working with 6-inch strips. That'll give me a 5.5-inch finished strip set. And then you're also going to cut several pieces of fabric. You could do all different colors for the front, and then, like I said, the same color just for the back, or completely mix it up like what I've done. So you're going to need as many pieces of front fabric and backing fabric as you need for your rows, and then your batting as well, all cut to the same width. The other tool that you really want when you're working with quilting with your serger is wonder clips. So here I've got my little Clover wonder clip. And these are better than using pins with your serger because pins can accidentally get to the blade and that causes a problem. Now what I've got here to show you is one quilt in rows. I've already added 2, so you can see I've got 2. I get a little confused if I try to make the back and the front rows match, so I kind of go mixy-matchy. And now we're ready to layer our pieces. So you want to know what's going to be the top and what's going to be the bottom. So we're going to call this the top. So we're going to think about the rows of the quilt. First, we're going to lay out what will be the backing row, nice and flat, okay? And we're also going to need that extra piece of batting. And we want to make sure that we're placing the batting down. And then, and this might feel kind of funny, but we're going to put that backing piece on top of the batting. And we're going to make sure that we line up all of those raw edges. Now working on a big flat surface here helps a lot. But you're going to line up all the way down that batting piece, your backing strip. And if you've cut them really nice and straight, they should go together pretty well. There we go. So I've got mine aligned. And now I'm going to place my project, and you want to make sure that you place it right side up. So again, I'm calling this pink strip right here my right side, and I want to line that up so that I'm matching all the raw edges along the right side here. And then next to the party comes the next row that will be on the front of your quilt. So what I want this to look like when I'm done sewing is to have this kind of greenish colored piece next to the pink. So now I'm going to place that face down, or right sides together. So what I've got in my sandwich here is my front of my quilt, my top, right sides together, and underneath of that I've got my two backing pieces touching each other, right sides together, and then one extra piece of batting slipped in the back. Then I'm going to place Clover Wonder Clips on that to hold all of those layers together. I only need to put in one piece of batting because I already have a piece of batting inside of the quilt sandwich, if that makes sense. So we'll slide this down. Make sure everything's nice and lined up. And when I am clipping this, I like to put a clip at the front and the back, or the top and the bottom of my row. See, I've got both ends clipped. Give it a little tug. That will help everything lay together nice and flat. And then you can add a couple more clips in between. So I kind of started with the center and the top and bottom of the row, and now I've added two more just like this. So I've got it held together with 5 clips. Now when I take this to the machine, I'm going to make sure that as I go, I'm lining up those edges, and I've got the batting up against the feed dogs. The batting tends to be the stretchiest part of this project, so if you place that face down so that it's touching the feed dogs on your machine, you'll ensure that things feed just a little bit better. Now as I stitch, I've set myself up for a 1/4 inch seam. We talked about that in the first episode, how to get that perfect 1/4 inch. So I've got 2 needles in. I like using a 2 needle stitch for this because it's extra secure and sturdy, and it really helps to make sure you catch all of those layers. And I've adjusted my stitch width so that I definitely get that 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to skim just a little bit off as I sew. So just a tiny little bit, and as I come up to those clips, I'm going to take those right out. This is why I like the clip, because you can see where it's going to hit the foot and you can't accidentally sew over it. And I'm just holding everything nice and straight with my backhand as I stitch. So, and I'm coming up on another clip, so I'll take that out and just make sure everything's nice and straight. There we go. Right, coming up another clip. Now I have my clear foot on because I like to really be able to see where my needles are landing in the fabric. You could of course use your standard metal foot as well. Just gonna make sure everything's together. I can see my pieces shifting just a little bit. We don't want those edges coming apart like they are right there. So I'm just gonna make sure that the sides are staying together really well. There we go. Almost to the bottom of this row. Keep those together. Now, of course, you may feel comfortable if you use more clips than I have. You can use as many as you need. Hold those layers together. There we go. Okay, so I have stitched all the way down my row. Now, I used a bright red thread so that you can really see it, but of course you can use a matching thread as well. And now we're going to separate these layers. So I'm going to peel up the front row, and then on the back side I'm going to peel up the backing and the batting together. And now we're just going to open the whole thing up, and you can see that when you open that, it hides your batting and all of your seams, and you end up with those 3 rows. So now I've got 3 different types of fabric, 3 different rows, and of course these could be pieced rows or just straight cuts of fabric like what I've got. And then you want to make sure that you pull everything nice and flat. Now this is where you take it to your iron. Absolutely want to take it to the iron and give it a nice good press, just to make sure that all of those fabrics smooth out and lay flat. Sometimes when you're working with this, you might find that you get a little buckle like that, and you just want to make sure that you're completely smoothing that out so that all of those edges stay together. And again, that's where your iron can be really, really handy. So I'm just going to show you the very end here. So smooth it all out, and then make sure that on the back, the same thing is happening, that you're matching up those raw edges and that everything lays perfectly flat. And from there, you'd be able to add another row once again. So just to kind of give you a little walkthrough, this was the front of my quilt. So now I would take my next front strip. Maybe I want it to be these pretty little butterflies. There we go. And you're going to put that on right side down, okay? And on the back side, we need another backing strip. I dropped mine. There we go. So I've got another backing strip that I'm adding back there. And the final thing to add is the batting. I dropped mine on the ground. There we go. It's so slippery, it slid right off my little glass table. And then, again, you're going to make sure that everything stays nice and straight. Line up all of those edges, put in some wonder clips, and then take it to the machine. So you can keep adding rows to make this quilt as wide or as long as you want. And again, you can work with piece strips, they could be embellished strips, or just taking one of your favorite fabrics that's pretty on its own and sewing it together into strips. Now again, make sure that you've got wonder clips to keep that blade safe and that you've got a nice sturdy 4-thread overlock stitch threaded on your machine, and you'll be sure to have great success with this little technique. So I'm so glad that you've watched my Serger Saturday video here once again. Next week, we're going to be talking about how you can use a cover stitch for quilting your quilt. So today we did this cute little quilt-as-you-go method. Next time, we'll be working with quilt sandwiches in a more traditional way and using cover stitches to quilt those layers together. So be sure to check it out.